Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm sorry to say it's not lovely and sunny in Glasgow, but it's just a usual June day here. My name's Lorna Paul. As Derek said, I'm Professor of Allied Health Science at Glasgow Caledonian University, and we have been very fortunate to have been funded a PhD studentship for Sandy. Sandy is currently doing his MSc dissertation and is absolutely in the thick of it. So whilst I would normally have been encouraging Sandy strongly to do this presentation, I think it might just put him over the edge just now in the middle of his dissertation. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a bit about the unit and a bit about the project, and then Sandy will tell you a bit about his background at the end. So our studentship is, or Sandy's studentship I should say, is on upper limb rehabilitation using virtual reality. Yep. There we go. So we work in the Queen Elizabeth National Spinal Injuries Unit, which is situated in Glasgow. The unit takes all spinal injuries from across Scotland, so the helicopter's in quite often. And within the Spinal Cord and within the Spinal Injuries Unit, we have something called SCI, which stands for the Scottish Centre for Innovation in Spinal Cord Injury. And it's a multi-professional research grouping. We have a research mezzanine, which is really just office space, which sits above the physio gym actually. And that was established in 2007. And it's very collaborative across basic science right through to patient-facing research. So this is where Sandy will have his desk space and office space between the research mezzanine and the university space. So the project itself is on upper limb rehabilitation after spinal cord injury. And what we know after somebody has a spinal cord injury is that rehabilitation is obviously very important. We want people to get as much movement and function back in their arms and legs as they possibly can. We're obviously focusing on the arms. And as soon as we can start that rehabilitation, the better. And I'm a physiotherapist by background, so I know how important rehabilitation is in terms of improving the plasticity and the reorganisation of the surviving parts of the spine and spinal cord. For rehabilitation to be effective, though, we need high repetitions of, and I can say this as a physiotherapist, of often very boring exercises. It's quite hard to keep patients motivated to do the number and volume of repetitions of the same activity again and again and again. It's very boring, and we have problems obviously around motivation and adherence. But we've been working with colleagues on virtual reality as a way to try and make this rehabilitation much more interesting and stimulating, where we can take tasks that we would ask people to do as part of their rehab into a much more immersive 3D environment, as well as allowing people to hopefully do more activity. The other advantage of VR, it also allows us to give people feedback on their activity, so we can give feedback on the number of repetitions, but the amount of movement and so on and so forth. The final advantage, I suppose, is that it also lets people to do their rehab at home. So it's not about just having to come into the clinic and use a fancy piece of kit that might only be available in some specialist sites. These technologies now are pretty much, I'm not saying freely available, they're not free obviously, there's a bit of a cost, but it allows you to do more rehab at home. But there's not been much research at all in VR, especially in acute spinal injury, and we're very well placed in Glasgow to do that work. So the project itself is, as I said, to explore the role of VR in upper limb function. There are lots of VR games around, and some of you might have had the opportunity to use them, but they're not necessarily appropriate for people that have got any kind of injury or long-term condition. So what we plan to do is really go back to very first principles to develop VR games that are appropriate for people after spinal injury, so that we can then take those forward into trials and beyond. And some of you, as I say, have used technology similar to this in the past. Sandy, I'm sure if you've got any questions about the technology, Sandy's your person for that. But just to say a bit about VR, we're going to be using the Oculus Quest headsets, which are relatively new. They're coming down in price all the time, so they're a few £100. and they're fairly universal. It's not something that we're trying to design that as the technology moves on, it will become obsolete. So things like the Wii and the Wii Fit, we used to do projects on those years ago, but what then happens is the technology moves on, and it's almost like wasted research. What we're going to do with this project, and again, Sandy's your technical man for this, is make sure that as we're developing the coding and the games, if the technology changes, we've still got that coding and the game infrastructure behind that can be adapted to any new technology that comes along. The image at the top shows the Oculus Quest headsets. Sorry, the big advantage to these new headsets is that there's no trailing wires. You don't need to wear special gloves. It actually tracks the position of your hands, and it's got a fairly big capture window, so it can take in more than just your hands. From Sandy's point of view, it can link to Unity, which is, again, Sandy can talk about the software behind Unity, but it means there's a lot of as he calls it, the heavy lifting will be done because you can use reference and there's resources out there. So you're not always building absolutely from scratch again, but again, I'll leave that for Sandy to explain. So what's the PhD studentship going to look like? Well, just to, again, take you very briefly through it, I don't expect you to read all this, but we have 4 different work packages. Sandy's background is not in health at all. So the first work package is a literature review, and there's not a huge amount out there, but we'll be looking at the literature on VR, not just in spinal, but in other conditions, and also orientating them to the units. With COVID, the unit is starting to open up a little bit more, so our researchers are back on site. There's a bit more in terms of visiting and so on. So we'll get Sandy more orientated to the unit, meeting the patients and staff, going through all the the usual health and safety, good clinical practice training, etc. Then what we'll be doing is focus groups with people following spinal cord injury and therapists. We're going to, although our project really is in the acute stage after SCI, we're going to be doing our focus groups and interviews with people who are discharged from hospital, because they're the people who know how limiting upper limb problems are. As we heard from Peter, they're the difficulties that people experience. We want to know what tasks people find difficult, their views on exercise, and then we can design games around the tasks that people find difficult. I'm not sure we'll be able to do something about getting trapped in a lift on a hot day, but hopefully we'll be able to develop games that reflect tasks that people find difficult. We'll also, as I say, interview the upper limb therapists, and there's a UK-wide group that we can use. And again, because there's no point in us developing rehab interventions that actually can't be deployed in practice, whether that's in the acute side or in the kind of longer term rehabilitation side. So we'll be speaking to people with spinal cord injury and therapists. Then there'll be a big piece of work in the middle, and this is Sandy will come into his own with developing these games and using all the expertise that Sandy has behind him in his past life, which he'll tell you more about, to develop prototype games that will test on healthy volunteers and maybe some people with spinal cord injury, before we then go on in the last half of the studentship to actually do a feasibility study. And that feasibility study might be within our own unit, and perhaps bringing in some other if they're interested in being involved. So 4 parts to it. Again, hopefully it works out with the timelines that we've got, but starting very much from the literature straight through into developing the games, and then taking that into a feasibility clinical trial. So enough from me, apart from to say that in terms of supervision for Sandy's study, obviously my background is physiotherapy, and Sandy will be based with us at Glasgow Caledonian University. The other supervisors are Matt Hamid from Glasgow School of Art, who has obviously expertise in design and in VR. He does a lot of European work on VR. And the third supervisor is Marielle Purcell, who's one of our consultants at the spinal unit. So Sandy has quite a mixed supervisory group, which will cover everything from very much the clinical practice, the research side, and the VR side. So that's a bit about the study itself, the PhD studentship itself, and a bit about the supervisory team. But the most important thing really is to hear from Sandy. So I'll pass over to Sandy to tell you more about himself.
Oh, thank you very much, Lorna. Yes, I am in very good hands and feel very confident of me moving into the PhD with such a expert-focused supervisory team. I would be very worried if I didn't have such amazing people around me that could coach me through all this stuff. So just a little bit about me. Throughout my entire academic career, starting in higher education, helping others was always a priority to me. In my free periods and days off work, I would raise money for a multitude of different organizations. But with a grandfather with dementia and someone who was given an MBE for his work with Dementia Scotland, a group close by to me, the Forget-Me-Nots, were a close to home charity. And I was able to make a lasting mark on my community, raising and help raising funds for a respite center for carers and people with dementia. So from after that, I moved into a different side of my career, going to my bachelor's in computer animation, working on 3D modeling skills with heavy interest in games, as well as real-time rendering, which a lot of games use to actually show the images in real time. And from that, I actually worked in the entertainment industry. I worked on such big titles as, Call of Duty, It Chapter 2. And as great as this was and very rewarding for a 14-year-old self looking, thinking about it as a kid, I realized that some of the technology we were using for the facial capture was actually being used in university work. And to help with a variety of different disciplines, help with people with cleft lips and how to merge all those together. And it really got my interest going. And I got an opportunity, which I wasn't able to talk about previously, to work on a project called The March, which was a recreation of Dr. Martin Luther King's historic speech in 1963, The March on Washington, in this very realistic, very moving VR experience. And that always felt more impactful and more interest to me. And from there, I knew I wanted to grow my learning. And that's where I found the Masters in Serious Games and VR, combining two things I really love, games and charity work and helping a community. And I'm super thankful I'm at a stage in my life where those two things can come together. So a master course has allowed me to combine those skills. And during my master's, I aim to expand my knowledge with VR and with spinal cord injuries with my dissertation, focusing on spinal cord injuries and how to merge those two together, and with a focus in upper limb function. When I was given this opportunity to apply for the PhD, I was absolutely thrilled to help and give my unique perspective and work alongside the NSIU and Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I'm eager to make a difference in the rehabilitation technology and help those in need. Because if I was in that sort of position, I would, want to have a fun technology and still be able to play games. I had a really great experience with special effects who build a lot of game technology, and seeing those very custom controllers and building things with that. It was a really cool experience. And me being able to create those games and create new technology and play with all these new toys and really make a difference. And I think the VR technology that we have right now is fantastic, and it's only going to get better. So my main aim is to create something that can last for a long time and be reused, and create really fun, unique experiences that will hopefully take the monotony out of rehabilitation.
That's great, Sandy. Thanks very much. So Sandy does bring a very unique skill set to our unit. We've never had anybody in the unit with Sandy's skill set, so we're really looking forward to that. So I think that only leaves us to say a big thank you to the funders for funding this project. Hopefully you'll allow us to come back in the months ahead and show you more and explain what's happening with the games. But thank you very much once again.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lorna and Sandy. Definitely we'd love to have you back in here more about how it's going and see how the games come along. Very multidisciplinary team. Yeah, I think it's probably quite unique as a collaboration. So it's great. We look forward to hearing more about all of that.